I want to talk about Alex Hales, even though he's not currently in this IPL. And that's because a few years ago, I noticed a trend in English cricket. Their hitting type batters all absolutely smashed right arm seam. But usually they were really weak against spin or left arm quicks. It was this incredible pattern that kept happening a lot. I was told by coaches in England cricket that it was because most net bowls were right arm quicks and throwdowns were also from right arm coaches chucking very fast. But when I did start to look into this more, I realized there were a lot of batters around the world who could smash right arm seam and maybe one other form of bowling, and the majority of their strike rate would come from them smashing cricket's normie style of bowling. And I bring this back to Alex Hales because he was the first batter I noticed with this kind of pattern. Just in the last 3 years alone, he's striking at 162 against right arm seam, and against all other bowlers, it's 135. If that seems like a massive difference, it is. But he is still only the 5th highest when it comes to our list. There are so many players around the world that have this tick within their game, and that is not by accident. If you close your eyes and imagine a bowler coming in right now, you're probably thinking of a right arm seamer. And I know this because I got 500 people to do a survey on this for me once, and that was the answer I got more often than not. Right arm seam is the sport's most common form of bowling, regardless of the format. In the last 3 years, right arm seamers have bowled 49% of all balls and taken 52% of all wickets in major T20. And that is at the top level. Below professional standard, there is even more of it around. You simply cannot be a pro batter and not excel against it. This is what you get paid to do. Playing lefties and spinners is secondary to right arm seam at every turn. I do not pardon that pun. And so obviously the best players become exceptional against it. There is simply no other choice. And being that it's more likely or not you'll struggle against one or two kinds of spin, and the fact that left armers are clearly not for everyone, you need not to just be good against right arm pace if you want a long career, but usually be incredible against it. But we almost never look at who is the best against the most common kind of bowling. Well, let's do that now. We start by looking at the batters who strike the most against right arm seamers. Riley Rousseau sits on top of this list. He's been incredible in international cricket and franchise leagues over the last couple of years. However, the Delhi Capitals dropped him after just 5 games. The Singapore-born Perth boy travelling guy, Tim David, has established himself as one of the best finishers in the T20 circuit. That means he's going to face a lot of right arm seam, and he crushes it. Suryakumar Yadav doesn't really need any introduction. He's probably trying to encroach on Joss Buttler's current title, crown, or being really good at the T20 batting thing. Then you have Ravi Jadeja, who has had a proper transformation as a death overs pace hitter, especially since COVID. And here is our Alex Hales, only 5th. All 5 of these batters take less than 4.5 balls per boundary against right arm seam. But are they dominant against other bowling types? It's quite clear that each of these 5 batters have a significantly lower strike rate against other types of bowling compared to right arm seam. But it's Ravi Jadeja's strike rate who takes the biggest hit, which is not that surprising as we've all seen him struggle to get the spinners away in the middle overs of T20 games. Alex Hales and Riley Rousseau also slow down in the middle once most teams operate with the spinners at both ends and the field goes out. Suryakumar continues to produce incredible numbers kind of regardless, though he is at his absolute most explosive when he's going up against right arm seam. Tim David maintains a massively high scoring rate, and of course he would do that as he is slogging quite a lot in the death. That's kind of his role now. Of course, if we look at that end, we have to look at the other end. Bangladesh opener Mohammad Naeem is the slowest batter against right arm seamers. This is not good at all, especially when you consider he predominantly plays in the power play. He somehow happens to also be the worst against all other bowling types. So he's a 23-year-old prospect, and so far T20 cricket has not shown his best side. But the next name is far more confusing. Darcy Short is an experienced player, has been around for a long time now. When he exploded onto the Big Bash, he was hitting seamers everywhere. But his entire form has collapsed over the last couple of years. The 24-year-old Pathan Nissanka is another anchor and still in the development stage of his T20 career. But again, his numbers are very low. There's 2 other interesting players here. Nitesh Rana, who's primarily a spin hitter, has had his struggles against certainly short pitch fast bowling, but this year in the IPL, he has been far better against pace bowling. Even Devdutt Padikkal. And when you look at Devdutt Padikkal, he's also struggled overall, but this year in the IPL is also striking really well against pace bowling. It'll be interesting to see with these 2 players if it is a one-off or if it's something that they've actually changed in their game. And while right arm seam might not look great to them, when you factor in what they can do to other bowlers, they do have a bit of a bonus there. Even as T20 cricket evolves quite fast, wicket preservation obviously still is quite important, especially for top order players. You cannot be an elite anchor type batter if you do not have high balls per dismissal. And you're going to need at least one of those players in your T20 lineup for things like collapses. So no one in the world will be surprised to see that Mohammad Rizwan at the top of this list. He actually strikes at 137 against right arm seam as well, so it's far better than his overall record. Aiden Markram is the only batter to average over 50 against right arm seam and also strike more than 150 against it. He is one of the finest batters against high pace, back of a length type bowling. Devon Conway is a long stay opener who usually has a high strike rate as well. Weirdly enough though, not against right arm seam. Babar Azam has a very similar strike rate to Rizwan's, which makes sense considering that they face most of their deliveries for Pakistan in T20 cricket. After playing his last T20I in January 2020, Colin Munro has been pretty good in franchise T20 cricket around the world. He also strikes at 144 against right arm seam, which is more than solid. While there is a drop in the averages for each of these batters, Markram and Munro's average have the biggest dip in this group. Munro's strike rate remains pretty much the same throughout, but Markram's strike rate takes a massive hit going down to 132. And remember, when he's facing right arm seamers, he's not actually opening the batting in the last 3 years either. He's such a fascinating player to me because it looks like he would have every skill that you would want, but he doesn't, and there are some key things missing. And when you look at this record, you do wonder if this is one of those things. It may not be a major flaw, but it's certainly a flaw. And remember that Markram is a middle order player, one who often smashes the ball at the end, but does struggle to rotate strike or attack the spinners or even rotate the seamers in the middle. Would he be much better up the top, facing more quicks, or at the end, again, facing more quicks? I find it really interesting that he's so constantly used in the middle overs. I've said for a long time that he feels like an opener to me, but maybe he just prefers to knock the ball around a little bit before he starts smashing the ball. And certainly a set Markram at the death is a problem for any right arm seamer, or probably any left arm seamer. But to go back to another South African, or originally a South African, Devon Conway, he scores much faster against other bowling types, even if it comes at the cost of a lower balls per dismissal. Babar and Rizwan have a much lower average and strike rate, which is why they're always getting criticism from T20 fans. Perhaps they should try optimizing their scoring rates against the right arm paces, which they are clearly really good against. We now look at the lowest averages, and there seems to be a pretty obvious pattern here. Most of these batters are lower order hitters who cannot afford to put much value on their wicket. Haider Ali is an exception, but he is still a young batter with plenty to work on in his overall game. But if you are not a hitter or a new batter like Haider, you really shouldn't be on this list. But from all this, we can see some very clear roles. There are guys who smash spin and guys who bat at the death because they can only play right arm seam. T20 is going in a direction where you need phase specialists to minimize your output with both bat and ball. And teams are learning that the hard way. To put it simply, hitting more boundaries is the best thing to do in 120 balls. Balls per boundary is an important metric for gauging the quality of a T20 batter. And you can see some of the players here with an exceptional balls per boundary record. Only 6 batters hit a boundary every 4 balls or less against right arm seam. Riley Rousseau, Sky, Shaw, Lewis, Hales, and Andre Russell. And 4 of these also have their high strike rate versus this type of bowling. The correlation between balls per boundary and scoring rate is really obvious, and that's why this graph looks the way that it does. But there are quite a few batters in this cluster who maintain a good strike rate against right arm seam despite taking over 5 balls per boundary as well. And I just want to go back to one player from before. A few years ago, I did a similar piece to this, and the thing that I found was that almost no players score quicker against spin than seam. It's a massive inefficiency within the game, and often the players who did, like someone like Cameron Akmal, don't end up actually facing that many middle overs because they're opening the batting. And a lot of this is because of how confusing all these numbers look in T20 cricket. Here is Shayan Ahmad Khan, who you saw had one of the worst averages against right arm seam. But when you factor in all of his batting in the last 3 years, you can see that his average against pace isn't that much lower than it is against spin. And when you look at his strike rate, you will see that Shadab's actually still scoring quicker against pace bowlers than he is the tweakers. So you might think that he might as well stay at the end. But this shows his economy against spin bowling, which he's largely facing in the middle overs. And when he's facing pace bowling, it's usually happening at the end. He's actually, in the last 3 years, only faced 22 balls of spin at the death. So when he faces spin and pace in the middle, he scores quicker against spin. This is huge. Let's look at how big a swing this is. He scores a run and over quicker than others against spin in the middle overs of T20, while he actually scores just below average versus quick. So Shayan Ahmad Khan from this should definitely bat in the middle. And I show you all this for a couple of reasons. One is how hard it is to even prove someone is a spin specialist, even when your eyes have already told you that. But I also show it because right arm seamers bowl a lot in the power play and the death. So when people make runs off them, of course they're going to have higher strike rates. That accounts for some of the differentials we see. Of course, that doesn't change the obvious, that players see a lot of right arm seam and they feel they're most comfortable when they're facing it as a whole. It shows you how talented you have to be a right arm seamer and survive. So many of them are doing incredible work. And as we write this, Shami has dismantled the Capitals' top order. So their value is even higher in an incredibly batter-dominated format. And I just want to talk about the research that myself, Shayan, and Ritwick have done here. Because this is pretty rare. Even teams are just getting down to this granular detail over the last few years. That means that we're now looking at the first generation of players coming through under the age of 24 who've actually grown up knowing their stats against each type of bowling. If you look back to before limited overs cricket, you only needed to survive against the worst kind of matchup. Now you need to be able to score off it as well. And in the future, what will this information help build? More specialists or more rounded hitters? Or perhaps a bit of both? But one thing won't change in cricket. If you are good against right arm seam as a batter, there will probably always be a career for you somewhere.